Let's get real. You walk into a room and smiles flash like lightning, but something feels off. They nod, they laugh, they like your posts. But deep down, you know it. There's resistance, there's tension, there's hate you shine too bright. That's not a flaw, it's the reason. The very thing that sets your soul on fire, the hunger in your eyes, the unshakable drive in your voice, it doesn't just inspire, it intimidates. You walk into a space and you don't ask for attention. It just finds you. Your energy is unapologetic, alive, and impossible to ignore. And that, right there, is where the heat begins. Not because you wronged someone, not because you've stepped on toes, but because you remind them of every dream they abandoned, every risk they never took, every version of themselves they buried to fit in. When you pursue your potential, people see a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You don't have to say a word, and still, your life, it says, yes, it's possible. And that can feel like an attack to someone who's convinced themselves it's not. It's easier to mock than to confront, easier to dismiss than to admit they're stuck. So what do? They pick you. They question your intention. They try to make you feel like too much, too loud, too intense. Because if they can shrink you, they don't have to face their own smallness, your success, your ambition. Love becomes a threat. You raise the bar without even meaning to. You make others feel something they've been avoiding for years. Discomfort. The discomfort of wasted time, of talent left untouched, of dreams shelved for convenience. You make them feel that just by being you. And instead of sitting with that discomfort and learning from it, they turn it outward, towards you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're proof that they're not doing enough. They'll call you arrogant, not because you brag, but because you're proud. There's a difference, but most can't see it. They'll say you're too much, but what they mean is, I can't handle someone who knows their worth. See, in a world that trains women to be quiet, humble, self-sacrificing, your fire is rebellion. When you stand tall, you shake the foundation of every lie they've told themselves about who they can or cannot be. And then there's jealousy, the kind nobody admits out loud, but it leaks through this. It shows up in passive-aggressive comments, the sudden withdrawal of support, in the fake applause that never quite reaches the eyes. They hate you, not for failing, but for refusing to. Because failure would make them feel better. It would justify their own inaction. But every win of yours is a reminder that their comfort zone is a cage. And freedom, that scares them more than anything. Not because it's wrong, but because deep down, they crave it too. But here's what most people will never tell you. It's not your job to make others comfortable with your greatness. You weren't born to shrink. You weren't born to tone it down so others could breathe easier. If your light blinds them, they can look away. If your truth rattles them, they can choose silence. But you keep shining because you didn't fight your way through doubt, through fear, through every damn obstacle, just to apologize for arriving. Let them talk. Let them talk. Because the moment you dull your fire to make others feel warm, you forget You were born to burn. You hold standards, and that alone makes you a problem in a world that rewards mediocrity. The minute you say, "This is what I deserve," you upset the balance. Because most people are used to getting away with the bare minimum love, bare minimum, minimum truth. So when you walk in with boundaries, clarity, and expectations, they don't see it as self-respect. They see it as arrogance. They see it as an attack because you're not begging, you're not chasing, you're not clinging. And for people who feed on control, that's terrifying. Your standards strip them of the upper hand they're used to holding. You don't play the approval game. You don't need someone to validate your worth, your beauty, or your intelligence. You already know. You've done the inner work. You've sat with your pain, healed your wounds, and chosen yourself over and over again. That kind of self-knowing makes people uncomfortable. Because if you can love yourself fully, it means they could too. But they haven't. And instead of being inspired, they feel exposed. You holding a standard to how you're treated isn't demanding. It's healthy. But to someone who benefits from your silence, your strength feels like rebellion. You say no without guilt. You walk away without drama. And that's power most people have never had to face before. Let's be honest. Relationships, personal or professional, are built on unspoken compromises. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Accept just enough to avoid being alone. But you? You'd rather be alone than inauthentic. That's the difference. You'd rather walk solo than shrink for connection. That scares people because they rely on your compliance to stay comfortable. But when you hold your line and say, "This is the version of me I'm not willing to betray," you challenge them to step up or step out. And most don't want to rise. They want you to fall in line. And they'll try everything to make you question yourself. You're too picky. You're never satisfied. You expect too much. These aren't criticisms. What they're really saying is, "I'm not willing to give you what you deserve." But instead of owning that, they flip the script and blame you for wanting more. They paint your clarity as a character flaw, your discernment as drama. But listen closely. Anyone who tells you your standards are too high is really just admitting they're not ready to meet them. And they want you to lower them so they can stay comfortable, not because they care about your happiness. You call people out not because you enjoy confrontation, but because truth matters to you. You don't let things slide that disrespect your soul. Yeah. Don't smile through betrayal or laugh off manipulation. You speak up, you call it what it is. And people hate that because silence protects them. And your voice? It threatens their illusion. They want you to play nice while they play dirty. But the moment you speak with clarity, you break that cycle. You remove their power. You say, "I see you." And that level of honesty, that's dangerous to someone who relies on deceit. You've become someone who doesn't flinch at being misunderstood. You've grown past the need to explain your standards to people who never plan to honor them. And that unshakable posture, that calm confidence, it rattles those who only know how to relate through control. They hate that you don't beg, that you don't beg, that you don't bend, you don't bend. They hate that your life isn't built on pleasing them. Because when you hold standards, you create a new game. And for those who've built their identity on being needed, that's the kind of reality they'd rather avoid than admit. You don't conform, and that, in itself, is a threat. From the moment we're born, we're handed a script: what to wear, how to speak, what to believe, who to become. Far and most people follow it without question. They wear the right masks, say the right things, keep the peace at the cost of their truth. But not you. You tore up the script. You decided to show up in the world as yourself, flawed, bold, real. And when you do that, people don't know what to do with you because they've spent so long molding themselves to fit in that your authenticity feels like rebellion. You make them question the very structure they've built their identity on. You don't laugh when it's not funny. You don't agree just to avoid tension. You don't go along to get along. And that makes people deeply uncomfortable because the moment you stop playing the game, you change the rules. Suddenly, they can't rely on your silence to protect their comfort. They can't count on your compliance to reinforce their ego. Your truth. And people don't like to be challenged. They'd rather surround themselves with those who nod along, who mirror their insecurities back to them. But you reflect something different, something real, something unfiltered. And realness, that's dangerous in a world built on performance. People say they want honesty, but the truth is, they want agreement. They want validation, not truth. And when you show up with your own voice, your own mind, your own fire, they start to pull back because now they can't control the narrative. You're not trying to fit into their version of acceptable. You're not adjusting yourself to keep them comfortable. It feels like betrayal to people who only know connection through conformity. They don't hate you because you did something wrong. They hate you because you remind them of everything they had to kill in themselves to be accepted. You've learned that peace isn't found in pretending. It's found in alignment. Sometimes means losing people who only loved the version of you that made them feel big. The agreeable version, the soft-spoken, smile-on-command version. But that's not who you are anymore. You've outgrown the need to be liked at the cost of your soul. You've stopped editing your truth for other people's comfort. And that shift, that's what breeds the hate. Because you were easy to digest when you played small. Now you're bold. Now, add in your purpose. And that kind of transformation threatens those who still hide behind a filter. Your authenticity doesn't just free you, it challenges others to look in the mirror. And not everyone is ready for that reflection. When you speak your truth, when you live by your values, when you walk away from places that no longer serve you, it creates a ripple effect. It forces people to ask themselves, and that's not a question everyone is brave enough to face. So instead of rising, they reject. Instead of learning, they lash out. Because it's easier to label you as difficult, rebellious, or intimidating than it is to admit they're afraid of their own truth. You've realized that standing alone in your truth is more powerful than blending in with a room full of masks. And that scares people because you represent freedom, the kind they crave but don't know how to claim. They hate you not because you're wrong, but because you had the audacity to be fully yourself in a world that profits from your doubt. You walk in authenticity, and that kind of presence will always unsettle those who've only ever felt safe hiding. You don't conform, and in doing so, you become the permission they've never given themselves. You evolve. You refuse to stay the same just to make others comfortable. And that makes people deeply uneasy. See, most people build their relationships, their opinions, even their identity around a version of you that no longer exists. They fell in love with who you were, not who you're becoming. And when you start shedding layers, breaking cycles, speaking new truths, they panic. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because now they have to confront their own stagnation. Your growth acts as a mirror, and if they're still standing still while you're rising, it forces them to face everything they've been ignoring in themselves. You used to be predictable. You used to fit neatly into their expectations. Maybe you used to say yes to everything. Maybe you tolerated mistreatment. Maybe you let things slide because you didn't want to rock the boat. But now, you've changed. You've upgraded your mindset. You've upgraded your boundaries. And suddenly, they don't know how to handle you. You're not playing the same game anymore, and they're still reading from the old rulebook. So instead of adapting, they attack. Because change terrifies people who have built their comfort on your consistency. You used to accommodate. You used to compromise. But now you choose peace over pleasing. And that shift, that makes you dangerous. Growth requires you've had to let go of people who couldn't come with you, environments that drained you, beliefs that kept you small. And every time you level up, you lose something or someone. That loss is real, but what you gain is clarity, alignment, purpose. And those who haven't taken that journey will never understand it. They'll call you fake. They'll say you switched up. They'll accuse you of thinking you're better than them. But you're not better. You're just becoming. Becoming the version of yourself you always knew was buried underneath fear, doubt, and old conditioning. You didn't change overnight. You chose to evolve, and that choice will always offend those who never made the same one. When you evolve, you start seeing things you used to ignore. Conversations that once entertained you now drain you. People you once admired now you feel out of alignment. Places that used to feel like home now feel suffocating. That's growth. And it's lonely. Because transformation doesn't come with applause. It comes with whispers. If it reminds them of their chains, you start to speak a different language, one that only people committed to their evolution can understand. And the rest is there, fall away. Not because you push them, but because your frequency no longer matches theirs. Your evolution exposes the ones who never planned to grow. The friends who only supported the version of you that served their ego. The relationships that thrived on your insecurity. The family members who dismissed your dreams because They never chased their own. Your growth threatens the very structure of those dynamics because now you have boundaries. Now you ask questions. Now you speak up. And that disrupts the balance they once relied on. They'll try to gild you. They'll say you've changed, as if staying the same was a badge of honor. But what they're really saying is, I don't know how to control you anymore. And that's the root of their discomfort. The version of you that they hate, the one that's clear, conscious, committed to growth, is the version that finally chose truth over approval. You didn't evolve to impress anyone. You evolved to survive, to heal, to live fully. And now that you're standing in that power, unapologetically, they can't manipulate you like they used to. You see through their projections, you detach from their drama. You make decisions based on alignment, not obligation. And that kind of self-possession is rare. That kind of clarity is threatening. You didn't just change, you rose. And that rise will always disturb those who are still asleep to their own potential. Dot. You see through people, and that unsettles them. Most live behind layers, carefully curated personalities, convenient half-truths, polished performances. They've mastered the art of hiding behind charm, small talk, and surface-level smiles. But you see right past the performance. You catch the lie buried in the compliment. You feel the shift in energy before a word is even spoken. Your intuition doesn't just observe, it knows. And that kind of knowing makes people nervous. Because now they can't hide, not from you. You reflect their truth without even trying. And most people aren't ready to be seen that deeply. They crave attention, not intimacy, demands honesty. And that's a mirror many aren't prepared to face. You notice what others pretend not to. You pick up on the tone behind the words, the hesitation in their voice, the silence between the sentences, and it throws people off because they're not used to being read. They're used to controlling the narrative. They're used to being admired for their mask, not challenged for their motive. But when you see the patterns, the inconsistencies, the misalignment, they feel exposed. And instead of leaning into that awareness, they run. Or worse, they retaliate. They'd rather villainize you than confront themselves. Because when you hold up that mirror, you're not just revealing their truth. You're dismantling the story they've told themselves to feel okay. You ask the questions no one else does, not to provoke, but to understand. You're not satisfied with surface-level answers. You go deeper. You want to know what drives people, what scares them, what shaped them. And in a world addicted to distraction, your curiosity feels invasive. People fear what they don't understand. And when you ask the questions that dig below their facade, they feel cornered. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're honest. And honesty is disruptive. They'd rather keep relationships transactional, predictable, easy to manage, but yep the hell out of people who've spent their whole lives avoiding. It scares the hell out of people who has been themselves. You don't fall for charm. You don't get impressed by status. You watch how people treat those who can't offer them anything. You pay attention to the details, the tone they use when they think no one's listening, the decisions they make when no one's watching. And because you're not easily fooled, you become a problem. They can't manipulate you with charisma. They can't impress you with a highlight reel. They can't earn your trust with performance. You see through the act and it threatens them. Because in your presence, they either have to rise or retreat. And most people are more loyal to their image than their integrity. Your presence reveals what's real. It's not loud, it's not showy, but it's deeply felt. You walk into a room and shift the dynamic, not because you try to, but because you can't not. You bring energy that calls out the fake, that disturbs the superficial, that refuses to play along with what doesn't feel true. And the people who benefit from wearing masks, they won't like you. They'll label you intense, too much, difficult. Not because you are, but because they can't control the narrative when you're around. You're not here to play the part. You're here to live in truth. And that disrupts every space built on illusion. You've realized that truth costs you people, but it gives you freedom. You've accepted that not everyone will want to be seen. Some people are addicted to the version of themselves they created to survive. And when you bring light to what's hidden, they feel threatened, not by your words, but by your presence. You don't have to expose them. Your clarity does. Your refusal to pretend does. You're not trying to be better than anyone. You're just unwilling to live a lie. And that decision, that commitment to seeing clearly and living fully, will always be too much for those still hiding in the dark. You're unapologetic. And that's a problem for people who survive on guilt. You don't shrink your voice to soothe egos. You don't dilute, your power to make others feel safe. You speak your truth, not to offend, not to dominate, but because silence once cost you too much. And now that you've reclaimed your voice, people don't know how to handle you. They expect you to say, sorry for being confident, for being clear, certain. But you don't. You don't apologize for taking up space. You don't apologize for being intense. And when someone expects you to fold just to keep the peace, you let them know you're not here to be palatable. You're here to be real. You've stopped seeking permission, and that threatens the very system most people operate in. We're trained from birth to ask. Is this okay? Oh, am I allowed? Will they like me if I do this? You've stopped waiting for green lights from people who were never meant to guide your journey. You lead yourself. You give yourself the validation, the permission, the authority. And that kind of independence, it makes people uncomfortable. Because if you don't need their approval, they can't control you. If you don't seek their validation, they lose their leverage. And for those who only know how to connect through power plays, your freedom is threatening. You refuse to play small to make others feel big. You've learned that humility doesn't mean hiding. It means knowing your worth without having to prove it. And still, people will twist it. They'll say you're a too much, a too confident, a too intense. Why? Because you're no longer begging. You're no longer tiptoeing around their insecurities. You've chosen self-respect over self-sabotage. And for those who only ever saw your value in how much you dimmed for them, your brightness feels blinding. You're not rude. You're not arrogant. You're just no longer willing to betray yourself to keep someone else comfortable in their limitations. You disrupt the hierarchy. In rooms where people rely on titles, money, clout, and ego to assert power, you walk in with nothing but your energy, and suddenly they're off balance. Because your presence isn't bought, it's earned. You don't bow to artificial status. You don't kiss the ring of false authority. You see people as they are, not as they pretend to be. That makes you dangerous because you're not seduced by the illusion. You don't flatter to get ahead. You move with authenticity, and in doing so, you level the playing field. And people who depend on superiority to feel secure, they can't stand that. You make decisions for yourself. You trust your gut. You've learned that intuition isn't a second opinion, it's the first voice. You don't need to explain your choices. You don't need a committee to validate your path. And that rattles people who once felt powerful because you yearned on them. Now that you've taken full ownership of your life, you've shifted the dynamic. You're not codependent. You're not controllable. You don't need saving. You just need space. And your autonomy feels like abandonment to those who only knew how to feel important through your dependence. You stopped pretending, and that's your greatest rebellion. No more fake laughs. No more forced smiles. No more playing along just to avoid being labeled difficult. You're not difficult. You're clear. You're not bitter. You're boundaried. You're not intimidating. You're self-aware. And every time you show up in your fullness, you expose the cracks in the systems that benefit from your silence. You've chosen authenticity over acceptance, truth over tolerance, growth over comfort. You're not trying to be liked. You're trying to be you fully, loudly, unapologetically. And in a world that profits off your doubt, your confidence is a revolution. That's why they hate you. Not because you're wrong, but because you remind them of who they could be if they stop living afraid. So let them hate. Let them whisper. Let them misunderstand you. Because their discomfort is not your burden. It's their mirror. You were not born to blend in, to be agreeable, to fit neatly inside the lines someone else drew for you. You were born to rise, to roar, to redefine. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs you in full volume. So walk your path with fire in your eyes and truth in your voice. Keep evolving, keep disrupting, keep being. Because the ones who hate you for who you are were never strong enough to become who they were meant to be. Let that be your freedom. Let that be your fuel.